So before I start, Kathy reminded me of something that I think Dawn left out of your bio, Everett. And did you used to work at CVS?
It was a company that gave me my job after I was
Okay. So I got one question for you. Why'd you leave, brother? Love to have you come back. Good evening, everyone. Like others have throughout last night and the day today, I do want to acknowledge the victims and families who have been devastated by such a horrific act of cowardice as the bombing that took place in Manchester last night. It could not be more fitting that we gather at an event like this with the collective advocacy for the dignity of all human life that's represented in this room this evening. I'd like to say a big thank you to Kathy and any others who played a hand in this opportunity for me to share the stage this evening with such an esteemed roster of community and corporate stalwarts. I have had the pleasure of spending the last several decades of my life in the field of diversity management, and when I get lucky enough to spend an evening in a room of a couple hundred like-minded individuals like you all, it's a real treat for me. I'm usually working the room to convince others in the room why diversity matters to them, but you all already get it. Except for maybe Greg Almeida. We got to work on him a little bit. Just joking, Greg, just joking. Given that I've been asked to speak on the under the moniker of Champion of Change, I figured I should say a thing or two about that, huh? So now change management is for sure a multi-billion-dollar industry with many certified credentialed professionals delivering academically sound frameworks and methodologies in multi-page PowerPoints. I've got none of that for you tonight. So I won't be offended if you get up and walk out now. Maybe just a little offended. But what can I say? You should have read my bio. So what do I say to a room chock full of change agents? I'll leave it up to the real professionals to give you the formal breakthrough constructs or analyses. Instead, I'd like to share a few personal and professional perspectives learned from this on-the-job training we get through this thing called life. As the Chief Diversity Officer at CVS Health, a company of 248,000 employees here in the US, Puerto Rico, and Brazil, if I'm not a champion of change, not only will my career be short-lived, so will my mental and physical well-being. Change for me is not a nicety, it's a necessity. As the makeup of that base of employees, plus the 6 million customers we engage every single day, constantly morph, shift, and evolve at an unrelenting pace. We are indeed a microcosm of what's happening across America. When CVS Health rebranded and repositioned ourselves as a pharmacy innovation company back in 2014, I said, well, I guess my work here is done. For you see, I never speak in absolutes, but one thing I believe in with every fiber of my being is that we cannot get to real breakthrough innovation and sustainable innovation without diversity. And we cannot effectively manage diversity without change. So what change management tools, philosophies, and tenets have I leveraged to deliver on the expectations of a Chief Diversity Officer? Let me be brief and share 3 of them with you if you'll indulge me. Number 1, most people are not afflicted with one of the isms, whether it be racism, sexism, homophobism, xenophobism, that's hard to say. It's so bad I can't even say it. Xenophobism, etc. I had to come to terms with the fact that some of my biggest challenges aren't isms at all. It's the fact that what most folks don't like and can't adapt to is change. And when they see the world changing in one of the categories that precedes these isms, they simply don't know how to deal or are reluctant to do so. One of my good friends and mentors, the late Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, wrote a white paper once that spoke to this, and the example that he gave was Archie Bunker. I know that we have 20-somethings here this evening, so bear with me if you don't get the reference. For those of you who are not 20-something, I won't ask you to raise your hands, but we'll know by the people nodding their heads. What Dr. Thomas concluded was that Archie was not the bigoted, sexist, xenophobe he appeared to be. He was ill-equipped and unwilling to accept that the environment around him was moving along with or without him, and he acted out and spoke out against that. Another example of this surfaced when I sat in on a speaker who asked the audience, who among you embraces change? As you might expect, practically 100% of the hands in the room shot up. When he asked how many of them will be willing to do things fundamentally differently to bring about that change, the hands were less than forthcoming. You see, that's what change really is, doing things fundamentally differently, not simply incrementally better. One of my fellow practitioners who I've respected for many years, Mary Frances Winters, wrote a book several years back titled "Only Wet Babies Like Change." And it turns out that was more than just a clever title. It was a daily reality for most of us. Number two, you have to have the intestinal fortitude to speak truth to power. In the spirit of transparency, this was not always as easy for me earlier in my life as it has become over the past several years as I rapidly approach the mid-century mark. Rapidly. I found the older I get, the crankier I get, and the less tolerant I am of seeing something and not saying or doing something. Or worse yet, experiencing something and not saying or doing something. And if I was to ever find myself in a personal or professional environment where truth was the behavior that isn't tolerated, I wouldn't let the door hit me on my way out. While I know it would be much simpler to parrot back to people what I think they might want to hear in a self-imposed echo chamber, I constantly challenge myself with the question of, is this person or these people wanted, if this person or these people wanted or needed you to tell them what they already think they know, what do they need you for? And third, last but not least, have a reason. Be willing to meet people where they are on the change curve. No one likes or will buy into change for change's sake. Ever heard the saying, change is good? What does that mean? Good for who? What's in it for me? I saw something on the internet not too long ago that said, I'm still on the internet, Everett. I can't let it go just yet. It said, a gain in equal rights for others is not a loss of equal rights for you. It's not pie. The gist of that was the notion that rising tides tend to raise all ships. Instead of worrying about your slice getting smaller, why don't we bake a bigger pie so we all can eat? And heaven knows I like my pie. In a day and age when many of us seem to be operating in a mode of self-preservation, being the voice of our collective betterment is needed now more than ever. So let me close by saying I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak under the context of Champion of Change, but it doesn't take having a seat at a corporate table or the wisdom often tethered to longevity. All it takes is a shiny mirror and a few seconds each day to ask yourself, if not me, then who? And on that note, let me leave you with a quote from one of my favorite activists and monumental change makers, Miss Angela Davis. And she says, I quote, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. Thank you.